At 2 a.m. on January 2nd, 2026, the internet in Caracas went dark. The streetlights were on. The city was asleep. But the radar screens at the Simon Bolivar International Airport had just flatlined. 90 minutes later, the most protected man in South America was no longer in his palace. He was in federal custody, sitting on the deck of the USS Iwo Jima. The news headlines the next morning called it Operation Absolute Resolve. They called it a masterclass in surgical warfare. They told you the United States extracted a head of state without a single casualty. The official story is a clean, compliant arrest. The reality was a lethal engagement. While Washington celebrated, the hospitals in Caracas were confirming the cost. 70 lives were lost that night. 32 of them were elite Cuban soldiers sworn to protect the executive with their lives. His wife, Celia Flores, didn't walk out peacefully. She appeared in federal court in Manhattan. This wasn't a police knock, it was a breach and clear. To understand why this happened now, you have to ignore the organized crime headlines. You have to look at the money, and you have to look at the timeline. This operation didn't start on January 2nd. It started exactly 1 year ago. In January 2025, Nicolas Maduro claimed a third term. The G7 declared the results illegitimate. Most analysts thought the U.S. would just add more sanctions. Instead, Secretary of State Antony Blinken put a historic bounty on the president's capture, $25 million. This political deadlock triggered the military clock. August 2025. The rhetoric stopped and the mobilization began. Operation Southern Spear, 15,000 Marines deployed to the region. Warships locked down the trade routes. Fighter jets began 24-hour patrols. Between September and December 2025, the U.S. didn't just sit there. They conducted 35 airstrikes against drug boats. These weren't drug busts. They were rehearsals. They were testing Venezuela's radar response times. Every time they hit a boat, they watched how fast the lights turned on in Caracas. By December, they had the map. But the military was only half the setup. To catch a president, you don't just need his location, you need his wallet. While the radar was being tested, the financial noose was tightening. The U.S. Treasury Department began sanctioning individual generals. They weren't just freezing assets, they were cutting off the loyalty payments. Maduro's power relied on keeping the military paid. By December 2025, the generals were getting nervous. The U.S. wasn't fighting the army, they were buying it. But one man couldn't be bought. And that is why the DOJ needed a new weapon. They needed to prove he wasn't a president. They needed to prove he was a trafficker. And the evidence wasn't in Venezuela. It was in the luggage of a commercial flight. The diplomatic pouch investigation. The key to the indictment wasn't a smoking gun. It was a loophole in international law known as the diplomatic pouch. Under the Vienna Convention, these bags cannot be searched. They cannot be X-rayed, they cannot be detained. The DOJ alleged that between 2006 and 2008, when Maduro served as foreign minister, he didn't just carry documents. He turned commercial flights from Mexico into a cash pipeline. The witness statements were devastating. Pilots testified to seeing bags loaded by armed guards. Customs officers testified to being ordered to look away. The DOJ built a timeline. They traced the tail numbers. They traced the fuel payments. And they realized this wasn't politics. It was logistics. But moving the money was only half the problem. You need somewhere to hide the product. Enter the Tren de Aragua, the most feared criminal organization in South America. The DOJ discovered the cradles, storage units carved into the coast of Aragua, protected not by the army, but by the gang. The lines between the government and the cartel had vanished. The DOJ identified specific bunkers known as the cradles, allegedly managed by gang leader Guerrero Flores. These weren't just warehouses. They were launch pads, submarines and fast boats, loaded directly from the cliffs, protected by the state, operated by the gang. This gave the U.S. the narrative they needed. They stopped calling Venezuela a country and started calling it a criminal enterprise. The charge was narco-terrorism. This word is important. It legally changed the rules of engagement. Terrorists are not entitled to due process. They are entitled to a drone strike. President Trump declared them unlawful combatants. This was the final key. The legal case was built. The military assets were in place. The trap was set. All they needed was a date. And at 2 a.m., the waiting ended. January 2nd, 2026, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Before a single boot hit the ground, the war began in the cables. A massive cyber attack struck Caracas. It didn't just target the internet, it targeted the eyes of the military. The Venezuelan air defense network went blind. They didn't know they were under attack until the rotors were overhead. The scale of the operation was unprecedented. 150 aircraft, drones, bombers, electronic warfare jets, launching simultaneously from 20 different bases. This was not a raid, this was overwhelming force. 1,500 hours. The target, Fort Tiuna, the most fortified bunker in Venezuela. The U.S. claimed this was a precision action, but the morgue in Caracas tells a different story. 32 soldiers fought to the death. They weren't Venezuelan. They were Unit 9, Cuban Special Forces. Why Cubans? Because Maduro didn't trust his own countrymen to guard him. The breach was explosive. Room to room, close quarters, until they reached the inner sanctum, and the peaceful surrender narrative fell apart. Celia Flores was not treated like a first lady. Medical reports later confirmed broken ribs and severe head trauma. This suggests a violent struggle, contradicting the narrative sold to the press. Maduro was zip-tied, hooded, and dragged to the roof. 1,600 hours extraction. They call this the golden hour, the 60 minutes where the package is most vulnerable. They flew low over the Caribbean until the silhouette of the USS Iwo Jima appeared. The photo you saw on Twitter was taken 10 minutes later. Maduro in a sweatsuit, defeated. But how? How can you kidnap a sitting president and put him on trial in New York? The answer lies in a law from 1886, the Kerr-Frisbee Doctrine. It states simply, it doesn't matter how you get the defendant to court, you can kidnap him, you can drug him. As long as he is physically present, the court has jurisdiction. This is the legal gun the U.S. held to Maduro's head, and with that gun, they pulled the trigger. For a decade, the justification for this war was 3 words. Marco Rubio and the CIA screamed it from the rooftops. The cartel of the Suns. They told us it was a structured narco-terrorist army rivaling Pablo Escobar, threatening the homeland. But look at the indictment unsealed after the capture. We analyzed every page. The name Cartel de los Soles is almost gone. The DOJ admits it's not a cartel. It's just a patronage system, a culture of corruption, not a command structure. So why use the word cartel? Because corruption is a political problem, but cartel is a military problem. They use the label as a weapon of mass destruction lie, a scary story told to the American public to justify an invasion. January 5th, 3 days after the raid, President Trump took the podium to explain the plan. He didn't speak about democracy. He spoke about management. Quote, "I'm going to run the country until a transition occurs." This wasn't an occupation. It was a receivership. Then he said the quiet part out loud. He admitted the goal was for U.S. companies to take over the oil and, quote, "start making money." Critics pointed out a glaring contradiction. Cocaine isn't killing Americans. Fentanyl is. So why invade a cocaine country? Because Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, 300 billion barrels. The drug charges were just the key to the door. The oil was what was inside the vault. By January 10th, the contracts were already being written. Exxon, Chevron, Halliburton. The war was over. The business had just begun. This is why the cartel lie was necessary. You can't invade a country for profit, but you can invade a narco-state for safety. It was the perfect cover story, and it worked. The oil is flowing, the stocks are up, and Maduro is in a cage. But while Washington counts the money, Venezuela faces a new reality. A power vacuum that no one knows how to fill. With Maduro gone, a vacuum opened in Caracas. But the U.S. didn't install the opposition leader. They kept the regime. Delcy Rodriguez, the interim president, a loyalist turned collaborator. Meanwhile, the true believer was left in the cold. Maria Corina Machado, Nobel Prize winner, ignored. The U.S. didn't want a hero. They wanted a manager. And to keep the manager in line, President Trump issued a final threat. Quote, a second, much larger attack if the transition fails. Nicolas Maduro is sitting in a cell in Manhattan, pleading not guilty, but the verdict has already been delivered. The United States has proven it can bypass the UN, bypass the ICC, and decapitate a government in 2.5 hours. The question isn't, is Maduro guilty? The question is, who is next?